See.
Look, Tasmanian born and bred. What music was initially attracting your attention as a young lass in Launceston?
Oh, well, I was a pretty lucky little kid because my dear parents, Tim and Stephanie, they still have an extraordinarily broad and varied record collection. So there was always a lot of music in our house. And, there's... and plenty of the music that I sort of discovered through their collection remains enduring favourites for me. Billie Holiday, Nina Simone, Joni Mitchell, Janis Joplin, Tom Waits, Miles Davis. There's a handful of highlights.
It's a nice mix. Your mum's involved in radio down there, isn't she?
She is. Mum's been a DJ on the local community station in Launceston City Park for a long time now, and she hosts a variety of shows and is a very, very passionate music lover and supporter of Australian music too. So
good to hear.
Yeah, so my airplay stats are pretty good down there.
I can imagine. Your dad's quite an established and respected poet, so I'm guessing that had a profound influence on you being a words person and lyrics being such an important part of your music?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. My dad is an extraordinary poet, and he's one of my favourite writers, and certainly helped sort of instill in me a real love of language and I don't know, it's like something about the sort of playfulness of language with poetry. And obviously I'm a songwriter. I don't think of myself as a poet in that I don't ever write without setting the text to music. So, it's not, anyway, that's a distinction that's quite clear in my mind. But being surrounded by words and music and art, and it's definitely helped make me the funny little songwriting kid that I am.
You haven't been tempted to dabble further in poetry yourself?
No, sometimes I look at the text of a song and read it just on the page, and some of them kind of stand up, I guess, but for me, it's very connected to melody and to all the other kind of emotive, transportative things that happen with music. The song, for me, songwriting, I guess, I love the kind of storytelling element. But yeah, it's very mashed together with the music. I don't really ever separate those things.
Does your dad ever cast a critical eye over your lyrics and perhaps provide a bit of feedback from time to time? Yeah, look, both Tim and Steffi are still, they've always been my number one proofreaders. So, and I love, I've always included the lyrics, printed in the artwork of any album that I've released. So yes, I do always send it, the lyrics to both of them, usually just as a kind of for their eagle eye on typos. But see, Dad does. He does like to read the lyric to a song of mine before he's heard it. He said that to me a few times over the years. So, which makes me sort of vaguely anxious a little bit, because I'm like, I don't think that really stands up without its musical setting. But, no, and I have, with his permission, also plagiarised a couple of lines or bastardised a couple of lines from him. But, yeah, not so much. So looking back at your beginnings in music, would there be any advice you'd go back and give the young Lucie Thorne about to embark on her musical journey that the benefit of experience has taught you?
Oh, gosh. I don't know. Music was always a big part of my world. And I started writing songs, as a kid. I guess it was sort of in my late teens or early 20s that I really sort of honed in on trying to write my own material. And then, I was incredibly gung-ho young woman. Like, I sometimes think back on that. I mean, if anything, I'd just say, good Lord, don't, just jump in. And I think I don't know, I was a very brave and determined young thing. And so, I mean, if anything, I don't know, it doesn't work to tell yourself, maybe wait till you've written some better songs before you try and put them out into the world. But I kind of love that I was so sort of gung-ho about it. I guess sort of fairly early on, I didn't know how it was going to work, but I was quite determined that I wanted, writing songs and singing them to people to somehow be the central thing in my life, which it's sort of amazingly it has managed to be. I mean, it's obviously it's a terribly precarious way to be in the world, but yeah, I wouldn't change it.
And there were some earlier recordings of yours, a couple of EPs and an album that have been unavailable for quite a while out of print. Are they ever likely to get another lease of life at some point? They're gone forever?
No. Well, I guess that was the early work I was referring to just then. I mean, my mum still has quite a few copies of that very first record, hidden under the bed. I've made her promise me that they'll stay there. She's not allowed to put them on the black market. But, I mean, no, there's, I guess, I've lost track. I think, so Kitty and Frank's my most recent album. And I think that was my ninth or 10th full-length album. And, yeah, there's been a couple of EPs. But there's a whole bunch of albums in there that, like Everything Sings Tonight, for example, from 2015, has been out of print for a while. So I would, if I was going to do another vinyl pressing, for example, I would, press that or one of the other records rather than... I don't think anyone... there's I don't know how many copies I made of that first album, but they're all still out there, I guess. So I don't think it needs another pressing.
It sounds like to you they're like recordings from another place, another time, and probably another person.
Well, that's right. And I mean, it's not that your own work's really like once you've made it and released it, it's not really for you to listen to, anymore. So, I mean, I'm still incredibly proud and love, the work I've made. But I guess once it is out, it's got its own little life, and my job's to think about what's next.
Yeah. So your approach to recording through the years, have you settled into a particular approach to recording that works for you? Have you become pretty much a creature of habit in terms of recording, or?
Yeah, I mean, I've made records in lots of different ways over the years. My first 3 or 4 were in, very kind of low down DIY kind of home studios, either my own or friends. But the last... So since Black Across the Field, which came out in 2008, I think, or 9, that was the first record that I made with Hamish Stewart and Dave Symes and Chris Abrams, who have been my recording team ever since then. And as possibly some of your listeners will know, Hamish Stewart is sort of he's an incredible drummer from Sydney, and we've worked together a lot as a duo. So they're my A-team, and I've been a lucky, pretty lucky kid to be able to work with them over so many years. So yeah, since Black Across the Field, recording has been a much more sort of streamlined affair, I guess. Being prepared, going into a studio, tracking for just maybe, 2 or 3 days. And then typically I'll take those session time, potter around the edges of them, play a whole lot of stuff over the top, and then delete 99% of what I just added, and then, work with, the mix engineer to knock it all into shape. And I've done quite a bit of engineering on my own records, but I love that not being my department. I love working with an engineer who knows where we're coming from, but sort of doesn't get in the way of things and just, gets the sounds to tape. So, yeah, I love the recording process. I love all the stages of it. But yes, these days, the recording stage of things is certainly a little less precarious than the touring side of things at the moment. So,
very true. A perfect segue. I was about to ask you about Hamish and your work with him. He first appeared, as you said, on the Black Across the Field album. Tell us about the qualities of Hamish that make him a great musical collaborator for you.
Well, he's one of my favourite humans, as well as one of my favourite musicians. He's an absolute bloody delight to be around. So that always helps. But yeah, his musicality is just, he's an incredibly expressive percussionist and very sort of painterly drummer with, from the moment I first sent him a handful of demos and, that first conversation we had before we'd worked together at all, just the way that he talked about the music and the things that he heard and the sorts of things he imagined, he described sort of bringing to these sketches. I just sort of knew straight away that we were going to be on the same page. And then, of course, that sort of depth of understanding and non-verbal communication that grows from working and touring together over so many years. He's an incredibly beautiful and special thing. Yeah, he's a joy.
So before you met up with Hamish, because the combination playing live with a drummer and a guitar playing singer-songwriter, it's unusual. Was that something you'd ever contemplated before you met Hamish, or has it just happened organically?
Well, actually, our first ever duo show was an accident, sort of, because I can't remember, maybe it was a year after Black Across the Field came out. I'd been, I've always done a lot of work performing solo, and then, various other combinations, duos with other guitarists or, occasional full band stuff. And so we'd been working as a four-piece on the back of the release of Black Across the Field. And then I was booked to do a solo show up at the Darwin Festival. And, and then Hamish and I discovered that, so he was there working with another artist, but our set times didn't, cross it. I was like, hey, do you want to just join me on my set? So that was the first time we did a sort of spontaneous thing, just the two of us. And I thought, maybe it's going to be... I was so used to hearing all of that material either solo or with a four-piece band. So, it was a little bit of an experiment, and I wasn't sure how it was going to come across, but we just sort of flew through that set and had so much fun. And I can't remember who said it first, but I know we both looked at each other and were like, shit, I think the rest of the band just got fired. Yeah, we love them, and of course they didn't get fired exactly, but we felt like we sort of stumbled across this thing that really worked. And I mean, part of the real joy of that for me is that, having this sort of incredible, solid yet puffy cloud of percussive wonderment behind me, that gives all of that sort of energy of a band, but then me being, on the electric guitar, being the only melodic harmonic
player gives all this sort of freedom to stretch stuff around, and so yeah, it is a combination I really enjoy.
Great project you were involved with a few years back was with Peter Brown as Love Over Gold. Tell us how that all came together, and now 8 years down the track, is that a project you'd still hope to return to one day when the opportunity arises?
Yeah, well, Peter and I really did. We've become such dear friends, and we are in pretty regular contact. I mean, she lives in Iowa, in the middle of the Midwest of the United States, and it's a long and rambling story about how that all came about, but the shortish version is I was a fan of Peter's work long before we met. I think it was probably the very early 2000s. A friend of mine made me a mixed cassette, actually. Remember those?
Yeah.
Cassette tapes.
Car tapes, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, there was all sorts of stuff on this cassette, including a song of Peter's that just grabbed me, and I just I played it on repeat, and I was like, who is this woman? I was so drawn to her voice. And anyway, fast forward a few years. It's a long story, John, but anyway.
That's all right.
One is eventually, I was involved in helping get Peter and Bo Ramsey out to Australia to do a tour, which was sort of put on by Glenn Wright, who runs, he used to run the Mullen Music Festival and Vitamin Records, and I'd been working with them for a long time. So anyway, we got Peter and Bo out, and Hamish and I opened a few of the shows on that tour, and so it was after that tour that, Peter got back to the States and then wrote me this amazing letter saying, hope you don't think I'm crazy. And I know it's not very practical, but I just can't help imagining what you and I might do if we did some sort of duet collaboration, which clearly I thought was a fabulous idea. So we embarked on, we started off that project by sending each other, writing songs over email, basically, which is not something I'd done before. And that are all, toing and throwing sketches and little demos, and it was such an enjoyable and exciting kind of process. So we started off thinking, maybe let's just make a little EP via, the wonders of the internet and swapping files and so forth. So we started doing it that way, and then, anyway, I was going to be touring Europe later that year. We just decided, obviously there's nothing like being in the same room at the same time as the person that you're trying to make a record with. So I ended up going via Iowa and spending a few days in the studio there, and that little record just popped out in a matter of days, really. I mean, we sort of played around with it, but it is so it's about half the songs either she or I wrote, and then the other half we both were co-writes, and that album is just the two of two guitars, two voices. So yeah, I love working with Peter. There's a real sort of magic in we've got quite different voices, but the way they work together is a pretty beautiful thing. And we've toured together a few times here and in the States, and also in Holland. And yeah, I don't know what I mean, obviously being in the same place as each other is just seems more and more remote in this current climate, but yeah, I'm sure we're going to brew something else up together.
Yeah, there were some co-writes in that project, and you do dabble in the odd co-writing situation from time to time, but you mostly write alone. Is co-writing something you're getting more comfortable with that?
Really something I've done much of. But yeah, you're right. Like there are a handful of co-writes with Pieta. There's a song on an album of mine. The album's called Bonfires in Silver City, and I co-wrote a song with the beautiful JoJo Smith.
That's right. Yeah.
But yeah, it's not something, apart from those exceptions, it's really not something I've even really, tried to approach. I mean, songwriting is such a weird little mystery to me, even though I've been doing it for a few decades. I still don't quite understand how it works. And it does feel like predominantly it's a pretty insular affair, really, until they're ready to get tried out on people.
Yeah. Your last album, Kitty and Frank, was an outstanding piece of work, and something we don't see a lot of these days. That is the concept album as such. Tell us about the initial spark that led to writing that batch of songs.
Yeah, that was Kitty and Frank is you're right. It's a concept album. It tells the story of a great and tragic love affair between Kitty Walsh, who was a young colonial woman. We're talking 1860s central western New South Wales. And Frank was Frank Gardner, who was, by all accounts, a very handsome and charming bushranger. So they met, they fell in love, they ran away together, and they did not live happily ever after. And now I learned all about Kitty and Frank by going on a Blind Freddy's bushranger tour, believe it or not, run by my good mate Craig Lawler. In Goolagong in central western New South Wales, and Craig is a total bushranger nerd, general history buff, and fabulous storyteller. So I was so taken by this story, which I previously didn't know anything about. And so when I first heard all about Kitty and Frank, I was like, oh, I've got to write these guys a song. So I knew I was going to write one song. And the first Kitty and Frank song sort of tumbled out of me within about 24 hours of hearing the wild, true tales from Craig. And I thought that was that. I thought, yep, they get one little song, there you go. But their story just kept rattling around my funny little brain, and it wouldn't leave me alone. So it took a few years, but then maybe a year after I'd written the first song, another one came out, and then a little while later there was a bit of a flurry, and I realised that I probably had a whole album's worth of... I mean, it's such a kind of wild and weird and wonderful story with so many threads to it. So I sort of took myself a bit by surprise on that one. I didn't. It took a while to realise I was writing a concept album, but that was such a fun project.
Has it inspired you to go into research mode and maybe seek out other unique stories that could be committed to song?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I've always, I always love a good story, and I've always got, an ear open to the weird and wonderful. I mean, the research side of things with Kitty and Frank, I mean, that was a very collaborative thing with Craig. I did get my sort of, detective hat on and see what I could find out. But of course, and part actually too, just back to the Kitty and Frank thing, like part of that motivation was Frank Gardner was a pretty famous guy, right? And there's an awful lot written about Frank, but there's almost nothing written about Kitty. She gets a few references in the history books as being a wanton hussy and things like this. But so, and that's the case not just of that era, of course, but of so many other eras. So wanting to sort of try and tell that story, and this tiny little slice of history and bringing that female perspective back into it was definitely a big part of it. And in terms of research, like I said, there was actually hardly any primary material about any of the women at that time. So I like to think of it as I call it a historical fiction, because there's lots of, the story is peppered with factual bits and pieces, but I obviously had to bring my own little imagination to the whole thing. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I missed the opportunity to see you present songs from that album live. How did they translate to the live show? Did you interweave the songs with a storytelling element, or how did it go?
Yeah, I sure did. I got my. I mean, I love to have a good yarn at a live gig, but because it's such a sort of in-depth story, there was quite a lot of narration involved in the Kitty and Frank show. And yeah, we managed to tour it a little bit, but obviously, like everyone else's touring plans, it all got sort of rather abruptly cut short given the pandemic. But the other really fun thing for me with the Kitty and Frank stuff was that it was the first time I'd ever written songs not on the guitar. You know, I've always made stuff up with the guitar in my arms, but probably 3/4 of that album I wrote and then played on a synthesizer. So that was a very sort of liberating songwriting experience for me, because I've played some keyboards over the years, but it felt like I sort of cracked open a whole lot of my go-to things that I would draw on being a guitarist, and sort of ventured into a whole other sonic world, which I plan to do more of.
I guess if they ever make Kitty and Frank the movie, the soundtrack is there ready to go.
That's right. Yeah. I've got a few ideas on that regard, actually.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'm guessing, like most artists, you're in scheduling and rescheduling mode as far as gigs go at the moment. How's the schedule looking?
Yeah, well, earlier in the year, I did sort of get a little bit optimistic and think, okay, I'm going to plan a tour for the spring. And here we are in the spring. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't even know. I mean, at the moment, we've still got some shows later in the year that are hovering in place. But the fact that Hamish and I are both in New South Wales does not bode well for us getting anywhere else in the country.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and in terms of, I guess, as this rolls on, the practicality and the reality of rescheduling constantly is just, that's its own, nightmare and sort of impossibility, really. So there's a lot of limbo. I don't know. Might not be able to go and sing the songs for anyone anytime soon, but can keep making some up.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Has being unable to play live allowed you more time to sit down and create?
I haven't been writing a lot. I mean, I've been playing a lot. I've been based up here in northern New South Wales for actually ages, a lot longer than I had thought I would be, again, thanks to the state of the pandemic. But, I do miss touring, because I really do love it, and I find it, I get a lot of energy from that live musical exchange. So, but I'm also, the flip side of that is I'm also very good at being a little hermit and hiding away. So I'm clearly just in deep hermit mode at the moment.
You're quite the gardener, I believe.
Sorry?
You're quite the gardener, I believe.
Yeah, I do love to garden, and I've been up here in northern New South. I've been living on a mate's farm and being a kind of part-time farmhand on their beautiful organic veggie farm in exchange for a little hermit cabin and all the veggies I can eat. So, which is a pretty sweet deal for this non-touring troubadour who loves to get her hands in the dirt. So, that's where I'm at. And I feel incredibly fortunate to be writing out these strange times
in a subtropical paradise.
Sounds like there are much worse places you could be. That's right.
Bloody oath.
Yeah. Well, Lucie, thanks so much for your time. It's been an absolute treat catching up with you.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for all the wonderful songs so far, and we're sure there'll be many more to come, and once the world gets back to normal, we'll see you back here in Melbourne.
Great. I look forward to that.
That would be awesome. Thanks for your time.
No worries. Bye now.
Take care. Cheers.